March 2013. A body hangs in a Berkshire mansion. Boris Berezovsky, the kingmaker who made Putin president, is dead. Officially, suicide. Unofficially, a message.
The Berezovsky had recently written to the president apologizing for his mistakes. But this has not been verified by the Berezovsky family. Boris Berezovsky was found dead in his home near London. He was 67.
An inquest has been told how the Russian oligarch Boris Berezovsky had been left a broken man after losing a multi-billion-pound legal battle with the Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich. Mr. Berezovsky's former bodyguard, who found his body, said he had been depressed and had spoken of killing himself.
Watching from London was Roman Abramovich, Putin's favorite, his protege, whispered to be like a son. For years, his proximity to power placed him in a category few people questioned. He was wrong. Within a decade, he'd be poisoned at a negotiating table, stripped of billions, and exiled from both worlds he called home. This is the story of a man who forgot the most important rule. In Putin's Russia, there are no sons, only servants. Roman Arkadyevich Abramovich didn't begin life as a billionaire. He began life with nothing. His mother died before he could form memories. His father died before he learned to write his own name. By age 4, he was orphaned and shipped off to the remote, freezing north of Russia, a place where winters crushed buildings and hope was a luxury few could afford. He didn't grow up learning comfort. He learned endurance. As a teenager, he drifted through school, left early, and joined the Soviet military, where he discovered his first real business, stealing gasoline and selling it to other units. It wasn't ambition, it was survival. His early choices showed a pattern. He took risks, ignored regulations, and pursued opportunities others avoided. When the Soviet Union loosened its grip and small private businesses were suddenly permitted, Abramovich jumped in with an idea almost laughably simple: plastic toys, rubber ducks, trinkets that ordinary people hadn't seen in years. But money came in, and more importantly, Roman learned that the Soviet system was collapsing faster than anyone expected. Opportunity was coming. It would be messy, dangerous, and brutal, and he intended to take it. The Russian economy was dissolving in slow motion. Corruption was everywhere.
The campaign of Putin's has exposed the Russian military's corruption and overall lack of effectiveness.
What happened? Was the money all siphoned off in corrupt deals by people connected to the military?
Oversight nowhere, and laws worked only for those who could afford them. Roman found himself in the middle of a moment that could have ended everything, or opened the door to his future. Using forged documents, he rerouted an entire train carrying fuel worth millions of rubles, a heist requiring planning, courage, and a willingness to gamble everything on one decision. He was arrested. The charges were serious, the kind that would bury a young man for years. But then the case quietly disappeared. The company was mysteriously compensated. No trial, no prison, no consequences. Roman walked free, not because the system cleared him, but because the system worked for him. He'd learned something priceless. In the new Russia, justice had a price tag, and power belonged to those who understood that early. This lesson launched him toward the man who would reshape his entire destiny. Boris Berezovsky didn't just play politics, he owned the stage, rewrote the script, and chose who stood in the spotlight. A billionaire who controlled media empires and political narratives, a man whose approval could elevate someone overnight. When Roman entered his orbit, doors opened that most Russians didn't know existed. Berezovsky saw in him a younger version of himself, quiet, calculating, unshakable under pressure. Through Berezovsky, Roman gained access to insider deals that reshaped Russia's economy, the infamous loans for shares era. The government mortgaged its largest state companies to private businessmen. Auctions were staged. Competition was imaginary. Laws were optional. Abramovich and Berezovsky acquired Sibneft for a fraction of its worth. Executives who resisted the sale died under mysterious circumstances. Investigators vanished or were humiliated into silence. Abramovich didn't need to pull the trigger or make threats. He simply benefited from the system where the bold were rewarded and the hesitant were erased. But this was only the beginning, because something far more powerful was rising. Russia stood at a crossroads, desperate for a figure who could pull the country out of freefall. Cold resolve was required, the kind found in men shaped by silence rather than speeches. Discipline had to be replaced by the chaos tearing the nation apart. And above all, the moment demanded a leader capable of holding a fractured state together with sheer force of will. Berezovsky believed he had found the perfect successor, a quiet, unassuming man who had served in the KGB, Vladimir Putin. Roman recognized Putin as a figure positioned for rapid advancement within the evolving political structure. Roman backed Putin's ascent with unwavering commitment. Advice flowed from him in crucial moments, shaping early decisions within the Kremlin. Financial support strengthened the networks surrounding Russia's future leader. And when barriers emerged, Abramovich was the one who cleared paths others had no power to touch. Putin rewarded him with something no one else received: trust. Inside the Kremlin, whispers spread. He listens to him. He treats him like family. He's the only oligarch who can get him on the phone. Their bond resembled that of a father and a son. And while other oligarchs fell, imprisoned, exiled, destroyed, Abramovich thrived. Oil and aluminum fortunes expanded around him, transforming him into a titan of Russian industry. Soon after, the Kremlin entrusted him with governing one of the country's most remote and impoverished regions, a surprising assignment that proved his proximity to power. And then came the move that stunned Europe, acquiring Chelsea Football Club, a decision that launched him into global fame and turned his name into an international headline. In Russia, he benefited from Putin's protection. In London, he enjoyed Western admiration. Chelsea became the jewel of his empire, a fortress built from Eastern wealth and Western prestige. His growing presence in Western business circles drew increasing attention within Russia's political environment, and Putin does not tolerate divided loyalties. The distance between them had quietly widened. Then Russia rolled tanks into Ukraine.
He is under fire on the battlefield and under pressure at the negotiating table.
And the balance Roman had carefully maintained for 2 decades collapsed in 48 hours. February 2022. When Russian forces crossed into Ukraine, the invasion immediately reshaped the political and economic landscape for Russia's business elite. Overnight, the rules they had lived by for decades dissolved, replaced by a panic none of them dared to voice. The conflict created direct pressure on individuals with international exposure, including Abramovich. It was reaching into the lives of the men who once believed themselves untouchable. Abramovich believed he could broker peace, shuttle between Zelensky and the Kremlin, untouchable because of his unique position. For a brief moment, leaders listened. Zelensky reportedly asked the US not to sanction him. His access seemed valuable, but Moscow viewed his independence as defiance. Abramovich felt his vision begin to smear at the edges. Witnesses reported irritation of the eyes and peeling skin shortly afterward, symptoms later reviewed by chemical exposure experts. Experts later concluded the symptoms aligned with exposure to a targeted chemical agent. The dose was never intended to kill. Experts concluded the dosage appeared non-lethal. Putin never needed to say a word. The message carried itself. Sanctions hit in waves.
What Putin is doing is absolutely barbaric and evil, and this government is determined to stand with Ukraine, and that means imposing sanctions, and that means on people like Roman Abramovich.
His financial activity was restricted through asset freezes, travel limitations, and sanctions imposed by multiple governments. Homes he had walked through for years were suddenly guarded by strangers. His jets sat motionless on runways he no longer had permission to step onto. Even the ocean betrayed him, as authorities swarmed his yachts like vultures sensing a dying animal. Sanctions didn't just strip him of assets. These measures significantly limited his commercial and political influence. Chelsea, his symbol of global influence, was paralyzed and forced into sale. Wealth that once stretched across continents evaporated dissipated in a matter of weeks. The influence he had spent decades constructing slipped through his fingers as if it had never existed, and the carefully balanced life he lived between Moscow and London collapsed under the weight of consequences he never expected to face. Not a single prison door closed behind him. No follow-up poisoning surfaced to complete what the first attempt had implied, and nothing resembling a public condemnation ever emerged from the Kremlin's halls. Instead, silence became the punishment and exile the sentence. Roman Abramovich spent years convinced he could exist in two realities at once, moving between Moscow's inner sanctums and London's polished boardrooms. In one life, he was a global magnet welcomed by the West. In the other, a trusted figure inside the Kremlin's shadowed hierarchy. For years, he operated between Russian political leadership and Western economic systems. Billions can disappear and still be earned back. Homes, yachts, and empires can crumble and be rebuilt with time. But the moment Putin withdraws his protection, no amount of wealth can shield a man from what follows. His long-term strategy relied on maintaining parallel positions in both regions. Be Western and Russian, billionaire and diplomat, loyalist and free agent. But the Kremlin never builds special men. It builds useful ones. And when usefulness ends, so does survival. The question isn't whether he'll rebuild his fortune. The question is whether Putin will let him live long enough to try. Loss of political protection in Russia has historically resulted in long-term consequences for those affected, because in Putin's world, forgiveness isn't granted. In Putin's world, nothing is ever forgotten. Old loyalties rot into grudges, and every misstep waits patiently for its moment to resurface. A lack of public comment from Russian authorities typically indicates unresolved political tension rather than resolution. Abramovich crossed a line he didn't know existed, and the Kremlin answered with a reminder that still clings to him like a second skin. The sanctions and restrictions continued to influence his activities internationally, because individuals who lose standing within the Kremlin often see prolonged repercussions across multiple areas of their lives.